All right, everybody. We are going to be discussing the end of the war, and probably the most important thing about the end of World War I is that the repercussions of it lead directly to World War II. Like when you talk cause and effect, the cause of World War II is World War I and how countries are treated. So we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about a few things. One thing, Russia right away was involved immediately with World War One. Their monarchy is overthrown in 1917. They leave the war. The Tsar and his family are all murdered. A lot of rich and powerful people in Russia are murdered, and a new country is formed. The Soviet Union begins to build. And that's led by Vladimir Lenin early on, that you see here. They sign a separate peace treaty with Germany to end their role in the war. What you see is a monarchy with a king, and capitalism is replaced by communism and a dictatorship at that point. And this is the first country we're going to see in the world that is going to have that communist approach. But right around at the same time as Russia leaves the war, the United States comes and joins the war. All right, we talked about that the other day, why they did that, and you see about 4 million fresh troops entering the war from the United States. And when we talk about a war of attrition, you now have a fresh force coming in, more supplies coming in, and that's really going to be the beginning of the end for Germany. Their people were starving, they're suffering. There was talk of replacing the Kaiser, and finally in 1918 there is a revolution to overthrow the Kaiser. He flees the country. I think he goes to Denmark or something, and a new government starts to kind of take over. So your king leaves. The German Navy actually had a mutiny and refused to fight. Things are just really bad. The people are starving there. There's not enough food. Think kind of like the South towards the end of World War, or towards the end of the Civil War. And so finally, in early November of 1918, there's an armistice signed. An armistice is a truce to end the fighting. That armistice between Great Britain, France, the United States, and then Germany is signed on November 11th at 11 a.m. of 1918. So on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, ceasefire is signed. Armistice doesn't officially end the war, just says we're going to stop fighting. The Treaty of Paris is going to officially end the war, or Treaty of Versailles. And so here's a poem, Flanders Field, we'll take a look at. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders fields. So Flanders fields were battlefields, and the voice of this poem is like somebody that's died fighting. And they talk about poppies in the field. And across no man's land, that's one of the few things that would grow. And so poppies have become a symbol of World War I. Flanders Field seems to be a very popular poem, seems to be read at Veterans Day celebrations and things like that. And when we talk about Veterans Day, it goes back to November 11th. And that used to be called Armistice Day when the fighting stopped. Well, as more wars take place, they change the name to Veterans Day to honor veterans of all wars, not just World War I. But that's where our November 11th Veterans Day comes from, is the armistice that was signed. Here's what poppies look like. German soldiers put their weapons down and they went home. Prisoners of war went home. The war was officially, or was basically ended. The actual fighting was ended. And now the leaders are going to get together. Now, President Woodrow Wilson is going to head over to France. And basically, Wilson has the idea that we need to come up with a plan that can prevent all future wars. And he comes up with what he called his 14 points. So basically, it's 14 bullet points. And he says this can lead to world peace. Well, had people listened to Woodrow Wilson, it probably would have prevented World War II, but nobody listens to him, or very little. So this is what he brings over to Paris when he meets with the other world leaders. Basically, it is 14 ideas, and he looks at what caused the war and says, here's how we can solve it. Things that helped bring us into the war where, you had the German submarines sinking ships and things like that. And he says, well, how about freedom of the seas? We're going to remove economic barriers, make it easier for countries to trade with each other. If you're trading with someone, you're probably not going to want to go to war with them. Militarism, reduce armaments. Where we talked about militarism and the military's growing. If you reduce guns that country has and weapons, that might lead to less war. So open diplomacy, where countries can talk to each other. These are all ideas he had to reduce war. Those were his first 4 points. The second set of points give certain nations of people their own countries. And so we see a creation of new countries, but a lot of nations of people, ethnic groups, don't get their countries yet. And that's going to create issues in the future as well. But that's what redrawing lines, giving certain groups their own countries. Some of it happens, some of it doesn't. But that's the second set of points that he comes up with. And then the last one, it kind of looks like it's cut off here on the screen, but essentially the creation of an association of nations. He wants to create a league of nations. And that's the one thing that they will do, is create a league of nations. But unfortunately, not every country joins the League of Nations. This was an international organization that wanted to preserve peace. And of course, it's Woodrow Wilson's idea, but Congress never approves it. We never join the League of Nations. And the League of Nations wasn't very strong. And there was a big push like, well, if we join it, now other countries might be able to kind of tell us what to do. We might get dragged into another war. We don't want to do that, where we have, tens of thousands of troops killed. And so the idea of isolationism is back. We do not want to join any organization where we can get brought into a war. Let's just worry about ourselves, stay home. And that's going to lead to a set of laws that are going to be created in the 1930s, these neutrality acts, which makes it against the law for the United States to help any country at war, even sending supplies. And you'll learn more about that in modern America. So Wilson heads over to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. He brings his 14 points with him. The goal was to create peace throughout the world. You had the leaders of this conference were Wilson with the USA, Great Britain, France, and Italy. Here's all the leaders there. There's Wilson, he's the tallest. 32 leaders were at the conference from around the world. And they kind of debated what should happen. Some really wanted to punish Germany. Others, like Wilson, wanted to help Germany rebuild. Some of the leaders that were there wanted independence for their nations. They wanted these colonies to be able to become free, like Vietnam. The Vietnamese people were currently being ruled by the French. They want independence. They don't get it. Great Britain, what they really wanted was money. They want Germany to pay them money. France really wants revenge. They really want to stick it to Germany. They want to make them pay. They're going to take some of their land back that Germany had taken from them in previous wars. Italy wanted land. They want to expand. And pretty much Woodrow Wilson just wants to set something up that will promote peace. So you got these main leaders all kind of arguing with what they want. And the official treaty is the Treaty of Versailles. And that's going to officially end the war. And that's going to be where Germany is going to be forced to pay big money, over $55 million to the Allied powers. And what do we see as results of this Treaty of Versailles? New nations are created. right? Nations that didn't exist before, or I should say states that didn't exist before. Finally, the Polish people had a country of their own. Polish people were going to be ruled by Polish people. Lithuanians were going to be ruled by Lithuanians, Latvians by Latvians, Estonians by Estonians. The Czechs and the Slovaks were put together, but Austria and Hungary are now their own countries. The Serbs are going to rule Yugoslavia down here, which later on is going to be broken up into lots of different countries. So we see some countries get bigger, some countries get smaller, some countries are broken up into lots of other countries. So the Treaty of Versailles officially ends the war, but Germany really gets, um, you know, really gets hurt by this treaty. They have to pay a lot of money. They call it the War Guilt Clause. Germany had to admit that it was their fault that the war started. We know that's not necessarily the case. It was this perfect storm of all these things happening. But Germany has to admit that they're the ones that caused the damage. They have to pay 33 billion in reparations. They have to give up land, disarm their military, and so all these things kind of are going to really hurt Germany's economy. It says 55 billion there, but that's probably not in like American dollars. Might be in like the German mark or something. So Germany loses land. That's tax dollars. That's natural resources that they start to lose. Some of it ends up in, you know, Czechoslovakia. Some of it's going to end up in Poland. Some of it's going to end up in French hands or Luxembourg hands and all that stuff. Danish hands. We see 9 new countries formed. Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Austria, and Hungary are all new countries. And I know there was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but essentially new countries form. The Ottoman Empire is going to break apart into lots of other smaller countries, and they're not true countries yet. Turkey is going to become a democracy rather than a monarchy like before, and the French and British are going to kind of carve up the Middle East and kind of control it for a while until after World War II. I think I'm going to have that link for you. I might post it. I'll post it and you'll have a chance to watch it if you want. So what was the impact of this war? Well, 7 million soldiers were killed. $280 billion were spent. You look at the deaths, the casualties, soldiers going home with post-traumatic stress disorder, missing limbs, and all that stuff. There was an end of absolute monarchies. We see Germany go from a monarchy to a democracy. Austria-Hungary goes to democracies. The Ottoman Empire goes to democracy. Right? The Russian monarchy, the Russian king and queen are gone, but they're replaced by communism. But these powerful monarchies are gone forever in Europe. The old kings and queens. The US is going to emerge from this as a world power, a superpower. And they don't have all the destruction in their country that the others did. They've made a movie about this guy, but down this Lawrence of Arabia, real quick, we're almost out of time here, but he was a British archaeologist who helps organize the Arabs who revolt against the Turks who controlled the Ottoman Empire. After the war, they want their own country. That's kind of what they're promised for helping fight in this war. They don't get it. And so the Ottoman Empire at one point looked really big. And by World War I, it wasn't that big anymore. They were known as the sick man of Europe or whatever at the time. But the Sykes-Picot Treaty basically gives the French and British control of much of the Middle East. And they draw lines in there that put ethnic groups together that probably should have never been put together. And that's going to lead to some problems down the line. And it's going to even lead to the creation of Israel later on, which, is going to have some minor connections that leads to the war on terrorism today. So World War I, you can say some of the after effects of that still are affecting us today in 2020. And of course, leads to the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany.